White Orchard is full of quests designed to teach the player about the world of The Witcher 3. Whenever a person picks up a new fantasy title, be it a book, film, or video game, it can be difficult to sift through the noun soup you're presented with. If you're unfamiliar with the novels or the television series, or if it's simply your first time through the game, it might not be easy to figure out what separates an Nilfgaardian from a Temerian, and to understand the politics of the Third Northern War. Along the way, however, the developers trust players to figure out their own opinions on the war, as side quests will allow Geralt to choose who ultimately wins the conflict. But at the start of The Witcher 3, knowing about the major players and the prominent nations in this struggle is far less important than understanding the game's point of view on war itself. To show us its take on the horrors and inhumanity of medieval warfare, the game provides us with the side quest Missing in Action. Though the quest is short, it tells us so much about how the developers intend to portray the Third Northern War. It's not a noble conflict fought by knights in shining armor, nor a heroic struggle that will be sung about in ballads for generations to come. It is a grim, brutal war of attrition between two dictators that will leave the continent no better than they found it, all while pitting peasants who might otherwise be friends against one another. The Third Northern War is mentioned throughout Geralt's time in White Orchard, starting with Vesemir's mention of it. Right away, we're shown Geralt's famous neutrality, as he questions his mentor's belief that the Witchers have a side in the conflict. For new players, it's a peek at how the White Wolf views the world. But for veterans, it's a sign of what's to come, as experienced gamers and readers of the books are well aware that Geralt's attempts to avoid taking sides often end up with him being forced to do so eventually. At the tavern, this is furthered in his conversation with the scholar, the guy who most folks probably remember, either positively or negatively, as the guy who teaches you how to play Gwent. The scholar is in White Orchard to write about the war, a career choice that Geralt can either chastise, calling it a death wish, or praise, suggesting that an honest report about the unsung evils of war is something the continent sorely needs. The latter response comes off rather blunt, as any Witcher would when saying something like this, but it doesn't make his point any less salient. No matter how he may feel about Temeria, a nation the game holds in higher regard than any other, there's no bravado, no dismissing the horrors being inflicted here. Once more, Geralt, the non-human, is the most human person in the room. While others try to sugarcoat the violence, he is refreshingly real, a point that's furthered when the scholar himself scoffs at Geralt's point. The scholar's attitude here reminds me of the folks who went to watch the first battles of the American Civil War with picnic baskets. Picnic baskets! As though it were just an unusually violent sporting event, not an impending bloodbath where countless Americans would lose their lives. It's not long before Geralt comes face to face with the realities of war he was talking about with the scholar, as he'll soon pick up the quest Missing in Action. Among the first notice board quests Geralt can find, a feature I adore, by the way, Missing in Action tasks Geralt with helping a villager named Dune find his brother Bastian, who never came back from the battle with the Nilfgaardians. In our opening conversation with Dune, we see the effectiveness of wartime propaganda on the populace. Dune went so far as cutting off some of his fingers to avoid having to enlist, but Bastian wouldn't have it, and wanted to stand up for his homeland. A noble cause, but ultimately a fruitless one, thanks to the overwhelming power of the Nilfgaardian war machine. It's often forgotten about during discussions of medieval warfare and fantasy stories, as the focus is typically on knights and trained warriors, but an unfortunate number of soldiers were just like Bastian, everyday folks who were talked into fighting for their country at the behest of a lord they've never met. Throughout his conversation with Dune, Geralt is, once again, refreshingly real about the chances of finding Bastian. When I was younger, I was always a bit taken aback by this, but in my current job, I often have to deliver upsetting news, so I've really come to appreciate the honesty Geralt uses with Dune. Again, he's fully aware of the unsung evils of war. He knows the chances of finding Bastian are slim, and the worst thing he can do right now is give Dune false hope. When they reach the battlefield, Geralt keeps up his honesty, telling Dune that even finding Bastien's body, if it comes to it, will be difficult. But Dune is determined and willing to pay, so the White Wolf does what he can. It's here that we see the carnage of the Third Northern War on full display. Bodies burned to the point they're unrecognizable, torn to bits by magic, or devoured by ghouls, leaving loved ones to look for small markings like white flowers to identify the missing. In our worldwide consciousness, it was World War I that opened our eyes to the horrors of war. But in truth, this is how it's always been. Since the day man first went to war, it's been exactly this brutal. Only the calculus has changed, with our improved communication to help spread the word. I give the developers credit for their honesty in its portrayal. It's not window dressing to their grimdark setting. It's reality. But just as real as war's horrors are its hidden humanity, the moments that remind us that the soldiers on opposing side are not just strategy game units, but living, breathing humans capable of acts of kindness that far outshine the darkness their distant and unfeeling lords wish they would inflict on their fellow man. And that is where Missing in Action reaches its climax. After failing to find Bastien on the battlefield, Dune's dog Hussar picks up his scent, leading Geralt and Dune to an abandoned shack, where they find Bastien with a Nilfgaardian soldier, and laughing about taking a dump, of all things. The topic itself is a nice and amusing touch. It reminds me of how my father used to say that all conversations between men ultimately lead back to such things. But for Dune, it's a complete shock. The Nilfgaardians are the enemy, so he assumes that Bastien is in danger. As Bastien explains, both he and the Nilfgaardian, Rosen, were wounded during the battle. Bastien was cut on his side and suffered a blow to the head, blinding him temporarily, while Rosen twisted his leg. Amidst the chaos, they joined forces and helped each other escape to safety, a blind man leading a cripple, as Bastien puts it. After delivering some medical advice, Geralt is left with a decision to make. Should Dune take Rosen in as thanks for helping save Bastien's life? Or is bringing a Nilfgaardian deserter into his home too great a risk? There are no right answers in The Witcher. But it is, to me, noteworthy that in a game where happy endings to quests are typically hard to come by, the end result of Missing in Action is rather clear. If Dune doesn't take in Rosen, he'll die. But if he does, you can find the three of them later in the game living on Dune's farm in White Orchard. Rosen's choice of clothing is a bit, perplexing, given that the idea is for him to blend in with the Temerians, not stand out in a brightly colored outfit. Still, they seem to be doing pretty well for themselves, and not at all in danger of being discovered by the Nilfgaardians. If you are someone who leaves Rosen to die, I do understand why you'd make that decision. Geralt raises a good point about the danger the Nilfgaardians pose, how they'd kill Rosen for deserting, and Dune's entire family just for harboring him. But I do think it's significant that in a game that typically asks questions of its players and tasks them with finding the most agreeable answer out of a slew of bad options, Missing in Action is a bit more of a binary. That's not a knock on the quest. Rather, I think this one is stronger for it. Not every quest needs to be a moral quandary, like Family Matters or The Night of Long Fangs. Sometimes, the developers can say more by providing the option for a clear-cut, good ending. And I think that's true for Missing in Action. By showing Dune, Bastien, and Rosen living happily together, The Witcher 3 is reminding us of its stance on the Third Northern War. That it is a terrible, brutal conflict where peasants who might otherwise be friends are sent to kill one another, while Autocrat A and Autocrat B live lavish lives and move their soldiers about like pieces on a chessboard. They don't fight the battles themselves. They don't suffer at all from their decisions. They always send the poor to do their dirty work for them. But despite all that, there's humanity and hope to be found when men who've been forced to fight each other are given the opportunity to meet each other not as enemies, but equals. Like a man who can't see, leading a man who can't walk away from the horrors of war. Thanks for watching. This is the second entry in an ongoing series of essays that will break down and analyze every major quest from The Witcher 3. So if you enjoyed this video, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me on Patreon or through a YouTube channel membership. Huge shout out to my Witcher collaborator Ellen Storm for allowing me to use her awesome music for these videos. Next up, I'll be dropping another character analysis video for Night in the Woods, followed by a close look at Kuno from Disco Elysium. See you guys then!